Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Med School Tutors MCAT webinar. Thank you all so much for joining me. My name is Melissa Houghton. I am one of the Med School Tutors MCAT tutors. I graduated from Duke University, majored in neuroscience and religious studies, took the MCAT, of course, and am now part of the MST team tutoring for the MCAT. So today I am hoping to share some tips, hopefully a little bit of wisdom with you all, and tell you about the CARS section of the MCAT. So with that, we can go ahead and get started. All right, so today, as I mentioned, we're talking all about the CARS section. So that's the critical analysis and reasoning skills section of the MCAT. We're going to get into some strategies for success. I'll share with you some tips that, I've come upon throughout my own experiences, and then also some of our tried and true MST strategies for this section. We'll also get into a little bit of what the score means in the context of your MCAT, talk about a couple recommended resources, and then we're actually going to dive into a real CARS passage and work through some questions together. So if you guys got the passage ahead of time, you can go ahead and pull that up, and we'll get to it a little bit later on. Oh, and importantly, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for me, you'll be able to throw those in the chat, in the Zoom chat, and at the end, I'll answer any and all questions you guys have. So stay tuned for that as well. And again, if you guys need any more specific advice, post this webinar, post our Q&A, you can reach out to the email that's in this slide, hq@medschooltutors.com, and our team will be more than happy to help you. All right, so what's MST? We have a really solid team of tutors who are, like myself, just tutoring for the MCAT, all the way through residency tutors who are tutoring for med school exams and such. So we are, at the heart of it, just a group of passionate tutors who have taken these tricky exams and been lucky enough to now be in the position where we can share some of our knowledge with all of you guys. All right, so what is in the CARS section? CARS section is 53 questions that you have 90 minutes to complete. It's 9 passages that are focused on either social sciences or humanities topics. So they're about split 50-50 in terms of what the subject matter could be on. And the real key to this section is that there is no content knowledge required. So what's really cool and also very unique about the CARS section in the context of the MCAT is that it's the only section that you don't have to study content for. Your Chem Phys section, your Biochem, your Psych Soc, those sections you all need to brush up on your, pre-med prereqs that you've taken, and maybe you'll invest in a study pack of textbooks to review. And the CARS section is different from those 3 in that none of that content basis is required. So you can walk into a CARS section and get through those 9 passages without having to do any content practice. Now, you can't walk into a CARS section and expect to succeed without any practice. That's sometimes a common misconception with this section. So in reality, one of the absolute keys to success in CARS is practice. Since you can't consult a textbook for content review, it's really, really important that as you're preparing for your MCAT and the CARS section in particular, you're doing a lot of repetitive review and practice with these passages. And the reason why practice is so important with the CARS section is because you really are developing a skill of how to read and analyze these passages and then use your critical analysis to answer the questions. So the more you practice the car section, the more you're really going to hone that skill and your ability to answer these questions accurately, and the higher you're going to score on your car section on test day. So I can't say it enough. Practice is so, so vitally important for this section. And that, to me, is a huge motivating point, because if you do practice and if you do put in time doing maybe a daily cars passage or at least weekly review into your study plan, then you will see those results and you will be able to start familiarizing yourself with how these questions are asked and how you can extract what you need out of the passage to answer the questions accurately. So just a breakdown of the types of questions you're going to be asked. There's 3 general groups for these questions. The first is foundations of comprehension. So these are generally the more basic, lower level questions that are just based on understanding the passage. This could be more, testing you on more basic text concepts or certain word choice or text structure. Typically, those answers can be derived directly just from looking at the passage. Now, the next level is reasoning within the text. So that might be comparing certain arguments made in the passage, or noting points in different paragraphs and using those and your own reasoning to answer a question. The third level is reasoning beyond the text. And that's really where you are using your critical analysis skills and applying ideas in the text to a slightly new situation presented in the question. So that's the general breakdown. And again, like I was saying before, as you practice the cars section, you really do become familiar with the types of questions that are being asked and how to answer them most accurately. So, you don't need to worry too much about, okay, this is a foundations of comprehension question. This is reasoning within the text. This is reasoning beyond the text. These are all things that you really will get a feel for as you start to actually see these passages and see the questions that are presented. Strategies for success. All right, so consistency is absolutely key with the cars section. And this can be challenging because every passage you see is going to be on a different topic. So some of these passages are going to be on topics that you may be familiar with. You may have read about one of them in a class you had, or even outside of schoolwork, you might just be interested in one of the topics that's discussed in a cars passage. Or you may have never ever seen the topic discussed before in your life. You might be so unfamiliar with it that when you see it, you even start to get a little nervous because it's totally new. All of those situations are perfectly normal and perfectly common for any student taking the cars section. Like I said before, there's no content required, so you're expected to be more familiar with some passages and then maybe even entirely unfamiliar with others. Regardless of your familiarity, you want to approach each cars passage the same way. I like to think of these passages in general almost like a puzzle, and you approach these puzzles with the same basic framework every single time. So even if it's a passage that you know a lot about, or a topic that you know a lot about, and even if it's a passage that you know nothing about, you want to have the same framework, the same skill set that you're applying every single time. And what that's going to do over repetitive practice is it's going to really hone your critical analysis skills and give you the ability to sit down on test day and answer every single cars passage without getting, flustered by not knowing a topic that you're being tested on. So the emphasis has to be on consistency so that you can really build that skill set. Okay. Another key strategy for success is keeping the big picture in mind. So while Some of these passages can get pretty specific, and it's easy to get consumed by small details within the passage that maybe are throwing you off or you don't fully understand. You want to always keep the big picture in mind of what the CARS passage is, the big picture and that main idea of the passage, and then also what this section is serving to demonstrate to med schools in your overall MCAT score, right? It's a really cool section because it's showing them like, hey, I can see information that I've never seen before, analyze it, and still make these great conclusions, answer these challenging questions because I've practiced this and I know how to analyze and synthesize new information. So keeping that in mind and understanding what this section is in the context of your MCAT score is really important. Okay, so remaining objective is a point that ties into what I've already talked about having some familiarity with certain passages you see. So if you come across a passage that you are really familiar with, it's also important to try and leave that outside context at the door and not take that into your problem solving with that passage on the MCAT. And the reason why is because sometimes your outside context can be confusing and actually impede your ability to understand the author's perspective. And understanding the author's perspective, rolling right into our next point, is absolutely crucial for answering CARS questions. You always want, as you're reading the passage, you always want to be getting a sense for, okay, what is the author telling me? Not what do I know from my sociology class in this paper I read. None of that. That's not important here. What's most important is that you're understanding the author's perspective, and that's going to help you time and time again as you begin to see these or practice these CARS passages and see more of these questions. Lastly, despite all of the tips I try and give you today, it's so most important that you find strategies that work for you. You're the one who's sitting down in test day and working through this CARS section. So it's really important that your own toolkit, your own strategy for working through these CARS passages is the perfect fit for you. You want to, over time, as you're practicing new passages, tweak the strategy that you use so that you can really customize it to what works best for you. Everyone is different when it comes to the CARS section. Some people, like myself, I'm a bit of a slower reader, so I had to really make sure I was customizing my timing strategies to give myself a little more buffer when it came to actually reading the passage. Everyone's different in this way. So, recommended resources. The absolute gold standard for all MCAT prep is going to be the AAMC materials. Those are the closest to what you're going to see on test day, and you should really put the appropriate weight in those resources. They are absolutely wonderful. I recommend them to anyone who's taking the MCAT. That should be the first thing that you look into purchasing, just because it's going to be the best preparation for what you'll end up seeing when you take the MCAT. In addition to the AAMC materials, exam crackers are also wonderful. Kaplan, Next Step, UWorld. All of these resources have lots and lots of CARS passages that you can use to practice and are definitely valuable, especially if you're in the beginning of your MCAT prep. Maybe investing in a package from one of those resource sites, you can start your CARS passage on those and then transition to the AAMC materials as you approach test day. Additionally, free resources, we love those. Khan Academy has some great passages that they actually work through, so that can be really helpful, especially if you're just starting out and you want to get a sense for how to work through a CARS passage. And then also Jack Weston offers daily free CARS passages. So there is really no reason why you couldn't do a CARS passage a day, because Jack Weston's given it to you daily on his website. So again, like I said, AAMC materials are going to be the closest to what you see on test day, but there are so many resources that you can use just to get more practice under your belt. All right, the moment you have all been waiting for, we are going to break down a CARS passage together. Okay, so I am just going to read through it for everyone so that we're all on the same page, refreshed, and ready to answer some questions. To consider how the jury trial ensures liberty, throw out civil trials for a moment, as the real place where they shine is in criminal trials. Most laypersons do not know the power of an American jury as part of the criminal justice system. They're given legal instructions by the judge prior to deliberations, but even those are guidelines at best. Juries are given nearly infinite reign to determine questions of fact, and legally, nobody can require a juror to explain his or her own reasoning on how they came to their verdict. If a jury acquits the defendant, the government in question is constitutionally barred from bringing up charges for the same offense. That verdict cannot be overturned or appealed for any reason. Following these conclusions, a jury can even effectively invalidate laws it thinks are unfair, using its infallibility and double jeopardy protections to shield citizens against government tyranny. All of this makes juries seem overpowered at first glance. So why did our founding fathers endow them with such vast privileges? In the olden days, courts in Britain and the colonies were heavily stacked towards the government and the crown. In a famous 1670 case in Britain, Quakers William Penn, for whom Pennsylvania was named, and William Meade were charged with holding a religious ceremony with greater than 5 occupants outside of the Church of England. At their trial, they were acquitted. The trial judge was furious at the decision and ordered the jurors jailed without food or drink. One juror, Edward Bushell, sued and won a case in the Court of Common Pleas, which ordered his release and determined that a juror cannot be questioned or punished for a verdict the trial judge disagreed with. A second case in the colonies paved the road for the First Amendment and the concept of free speech. John Peter Zenger, a printer in New York City, was printing newspapers about the corrupt royal governor William S. Cosby. This placed Zenger in the crosshairs for violating the New York libel law, which at the time simply meant publishing information against the interests of the government. After some early snafus, the most powerful lawyer in the colonies, Andrew Hamilton, no relation, stepped up to represent Zenger. They admitted readily to violating the law as written, but argued to the jury that the law was anti-ethical to free speech and liberty. The judge ordered their jurors to return with a verdict of guilty if they believed Zenger printed the stories. However, the jury returned in less than 10 minutes with a verdict of not guilty, and the groundwork for the First Amendment was born. One might be tempted to chalk all of this up to a couple of good 4th of July stories and flag waving of yesteryear. However, the use of a jury trial to check government overreach is alive and well even in today's era, with the case of Greg Craig. A prominent Washington attorney, Craig, was accused of improprieties in his work in the country of Ukraine. The case was seen as weak by the New York federal prosecutors, and as the Wall Street Journal editorial board noted, when the hang-em high Southern District of New York won't prosecute, you know it's a bad case. The Department of Justice later put forth an indictment anyway, and the President of the United States tweeted about it the next day, drawing the ire of some who saw the indictment as politically motivated. The trial happened later that year, and a jury acquitted Mr. Craig in mere hours, putting yet another stamp on the powers of the jury trial to check governmental overreach. All right. Thank you for bearing with me as I read through that. Now we can take a look at some CARS questions. Alrighty. Question number 1. How would the author respond to the notion that juries are given too much power to decide the outcome of a criminal trial? All right. So I'll read through our answer choices. A, the author would agree, noting that judges should be the ultimate deciders of a case as they have more law experience than the jury members. B, the author would disagree, proposing that juries serve as a necessary function by checking governmental overreach. C, the author would agree, citing the case in which John Peter Zenger was deemed not guilty even after admitting that he had broken the law. And D, the author would disagree, noting that most laws are fluid and can be interpreted in many ways. Okay, so this is a pretty common question format that you'll see on the MCAT. Our answer choices have two parts to them. First, we're asked, does the author agree or disagree? And second, we have to evaluate the explanation. I personally like questions like this because I think that they help me out a little bit. I don't have to just evaluate an explanation. I can also use whether or not I think the author agrees or disagrees to narrow down the answer choices. So our question asks, how would the author respond to the notion that juries are given too much power to decide the outcome of a criminal trial? Now, if we take a look back at the passage here, the main purpose, or the main idea overall, and the main argument that the author was making was that juries are given rightful power to check governmental overreach. We see most recently, this last sentence that we read here, the trial happened later that year and a jury acquitted Mr. Craig in mere hours, putting yet another stamp on the powers of the jury trial to check governmental overreach, right? This whole CARS passage is focused on explaining how our jury system has been established and the powers governmental powers have been given to the jury to then serve as a check on governmental overreach. And the author has really been in support of the power that juries hold now today. So just based on that overall assessment of the main idea, my first instinct would be that the author would disagree to the notion that juries are given too much power, because the passage was really focused on how that's a really positive thing and something that's needed within our judicial system. Okay, so if we decide that the author would disagree with this statement, we've now narrowed it down to B and D. And in most of the questions that you'll work through on the CARS section, you'll probably be able to narrow your answer choices down to 2. At this point, I always recommend rereading the question stem, because by the time you narrow your answer choices down to 2, you've probably spent a little bit of time looking back at the passage, thinking about the answer choices, and you could really benefit from a refresher on what that question stem is really asking you. So I'll reread the question. How would the author respond to the notion that juries are given too much power to decide the outcome of a criminal trial? All right, I'll look at B. The author would disagree, proposing that the juries serve as a necessary function by checking governmental overreach. All right, sounds pretty good. I remember I read that when I looked back at the passage. Checking governmental overreach is a direct quote from the last paragraph of the passage, so I'm liking that answer choice. D, the author would disagree, noting that most laws are fluid and can be interpreted in many different ways. Okay, so that explanation's not sounding quite as good. there wasn't really a mention of how most laws are fluid and can be interpreted in many different ways. Seems out of scope and not really related to the author's argument. I'm going to go with B. Ta-da! Our answer is B. Hopefully that was a clear enough explanation, but D would have been what we call a principal distractor, or that question that you, or the answer choice rather, that you toggled between at the end and might have even chosen over B if you didn't pick up on governmental overreach mentioned in the passage. So again, when you get down to that 50-50, and maybe you are being pulled towards our distractor, which in this case was D, revisiting the question stem is a great strategy to narrowing it down and really finding what that right answer is. Okay. Question 2. In the last paragraph, the term flag waving of yesteryear is most synonymous with A, a proud celebration of American history, B, examples of government power conceding to the will of the people, C, the notion that public patriotism has declined, and D, incidents of public outcry over case verdicts. All right, so if you get to this question and you think, okay, flag waving of yesteryear, I don't remember finding that in the passage at all, let's go back and take a look. All right, so if we look at our fourth paragraph, the first sentence reads, one might be tempted to chalk all of this up to a couple of good 4th of July stories and flag waving of yesteryear. One might be tempted to chalk all this up to a couple of good 4th of July stories and flag waving of yesteryear. Okay. However, the use of a jury trial to check government outreach is alive and well, even in today's era. Cool. So let's look back at our question. Our answer choices are a proud celebration of American history, already sounding pretty good because in that same sentence, we use flag waving of yesteryear and proud 4th of July stories. So a proud celebration of American history seems to be falling in line with those two already. B, examples of government power conceding to the will of the people. No, I mean, that's not really indicated at all by that sentence or any other part of the passage. It actually, if anything, opposes what the author's point is, so we can cross that out. The notion that public patriotism has declined. Okay, so it could have maybe been that because it's saying flag waving of yesteryear, but we see, however, the use of a jury trial to check government outreach is alive and well even in today's era. These good 4th of July stories are, not just a thing of the past and are alive and well today. So we can eliminate that answer choice. Lastly, incidents of public outcry over case verdicts. That's not really what they're getting to here. They're talking about these stories that have been brought up in the passage in order to illustrate the power of a jury. So D we can eliminate as well, and we are left with answer choice A as the best explanation for what flag waving of yesteryear means in the context of this passage. Okay. In this case, B was our principal distractor, but when we really took a look at it and considered it in the context of the author's overall argument, it was not a fit. Question 3. Suppose the Southern District of New York indicted Greg Craig initially, and he was found innocent. How would this change the author's central argument? A, this would strengthen the central argument because the power of the trial by jury checked the federal government from overzealous prosecution. Okay. B, this would weaken the central argument because the Southern District of New York is classically an aggressive wow, I can't say that. editorial staff, wow. And C, this would weaken the central argument because it now fails to demonstrate the political impact of indicting someone who is not indicted by a different group. And D, this would not change the author's central argument. All right, so our question's asking us to consider if the Southern District of New York indicted Greg Craig initially, and then he was found innocent. So let's look back at what the passage actually was saying. We're again looking down at this last paragraph, and if we look at, is this the fourth sentence here? The case was seen as weak by New York federal prosecutors, and as the Wall Street Journal editorial board noted, when the Hang'em High Southern District of New York won't prosecute, you know it's a bad case. The Department of Justice later put forth an indictment anyway, and the President of the United States tweeted about it the next day, drawing the ire of some who saw the indictment as politically motivated. Okay, so the Southern District of New York did not initially indict Greg Craig. So if we look back at our question, if Greg Craig had been indicted initially and then was found innocent, how would this change our central argument? This would strengthen the central argument because the power of the trial by jury checked the federal government from overzealous prosecution. Okay, well, we're suggesting a change in the argument the author was making, so even without reading the explanation, my hunch isn't that it would strengthen the central argument. And then because the power of the trial by jury checked the federal government from overzealous prosecution, all right, so yes, trial by jury serves to check overzealous prosecution, but if this adjustment was made, that explanation wouldn't result. So that we can cross off. B, this would weaken the central argument because the Southern District of New York is classically an aggressive prosecutorial staff. All right, so in this case, our explanation is correct. The Southern District of New York is classically aggressive, but that's still not really answering our question here. The change that's happening is the Southern District of New York indicts Greg Craig initially, and then he's found innocent. So that one I'm not sold on. C, this would weaken the central argument because it now fails to demonstrate the political impact of indicting someone who is not indicted by a different group. Okay, so this answer choice is really describing most specifically what is referenced in the passage. Let's take a look at it again, because there's a lot to really work through here. Down in this last paragraph, we see that the case was seen as weak by New York federal prosecutors. Southern District of New York won't prosecute. Okay. The Department of Justice later put forth an indictment anyway. All right, let's look back at the question. It now fails to demonstrate the political impact of indicting someone who is not indicted by a different group. So this is really exactly what the passage was describing, the political impact of indicting someone who is not initially indicted by the Southern District of New York. Now, if we change that so that the Southern District of New York initially did indict Greg Craig, well, we lose our argument a bit there. So C is really standing out as the best possible answer choice. The author's argument would be weakened because he would no longer be able to make that point, demonstrating that there is this significant political impact when someone is indicted who is not originally indicted by a different group. Finally, D, this would not change the author's central argument. That jumped out as a lame answer choice from the beginning a little bit, and as we've just worked through that gritty last paragraph and looked at all these answer choices, it's become pretty clear that the author's essential argument would change, so we can just forget about D. All right, and C it is. So hopefully you guys followed me through that explanation there. I know it's a challenging passage, and this is a challenging question with a little bit of jargon, which can add some confusion. All right, question 4. The author most likely mentions the cases of Edward Bushell and John Peter Zenger in order to provide context for the Greg Craig case, explain the origins of the powers authorized to a jury and individual jurors, expand on the powers of the jury and individual jurors. Okay, so as you can tell, this is another format used for CARS questions, where we have 3 potential answer choices and then, or I guess 3 statements, I should say, rather, and then our answer choices contain different combinations of these 3 statements. So from a strategy perspective, we can note just by looking at these answer choices that there are only 4 potential combinations, and we can probably use a little bit of reasoning to narrow down our answer choices, even if we're not 100% sold on how we feel about each statement. So I'll show you what I mean. First of all, in my opinion, after I just read those 3 statements, statement 2 sounds pretty good to me. Explain the origins of the powers authorized to a jury and individual jurors. That felt like it was pretty much the focus of the passage, right? And we can take a look back just to refresh where Edward Bushell and John Peter Zenger were mentioned. Here we have the case of Edward Bushell. This was our first example given in paragraph 2. John Peter Zenger was our second example here given in paragraph 3. So these were 2 fundamental examples that the author was citing to build his argument. And like we've been mentioning, as we've answered the past couple questions, the author's whole argument is trying to explain the power of jurors. All right. So 2 I really like. If I want to keep 2, I now already only have 2 answer choices, right? A and D. So, oh man, I blew it, guys. Okay, well, let's all just pretend we didn't see that. Okay, so I like 2. None of you know the answer. I'm narrowing it down already to A and D. And I hardly had to do any work. All I had to do was feel strongly about 1. So now let's take a look at the other 2. Provide context for the Greg Craig case and expand on the powers of the jury and individual jurors. So I happen to think both of those work. If we look back at the passage, the Greg Craig case was our last example given. It was the present day example cited by the author. And the previous examples, John Peter Zenger, Edward Bushell, those were really used to build this argument and provide the historical context for what our judicial system is like today and the power of juries today, right? So it provides context. Pretty simple and pretty clear just by looking at this passage and how it's constructed. All right, so now we see our answer is D, which is all 1, 2, and 3. And again, comparing A and D, even if you weren't totally sold on 1 or 3, if you liked one of them, you thought one of them were true, your answer was already D, because A only gave you the option of choosing 2 alone. So that's just how using a little bit of strategy along with obviously your analysis of the passage can help you narrow down your answers to the correct one. All right, so great job, guys. You made it through your first, if you haven't seen a CARS passage, congrats on making it through your first one. If you've seen plenty, then thank you for, staying with me and reading through that with me on the other end of this webinar. I want to just give you guys a little bit more information about Med School Tutors, tell you about what we do. So we do provide one-on-one tutoring, and the benefits of that is that we are able to construct a customized personal study schedule just for you. We help you find the content areas that need, maybe a little bit more review. We work those content areas into your study plan, and then also ensure that you're doing the necessary practice, getting in those full lengths, and doing everything you need to be fully prepared for test day. So that's one awesome aspect of our tutoring service. Additionally, every individual tutoring session is catered to your needs. So those really tricky content questions that you just haven't been able to work through on your own, well, that's what we're here for. We are here to really answer any questions along your MCAT studying journey, and also really be here as a guide and support system for you, because it's not easy stuff. This is a challenging test. It is likely unlike any test you've ever taken before. It was unlike any test I had ever taken before. It's long. It, requires this synthesis of everything that you learned throughout undergrad and your pre-med courses. So at MST, we really want to provide the exact support that you need. So that's what we aim to do. And additionally, if you're interested in just a one-time strategic planning session, we offer that as well. And we also offer support with your application. So if you have any questions, you can see that contact info at the bottom of the slide. Feel free to reach out and inquire about any of our services. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. All right, well, otherwise, guys, thank you so much for being here and tuning in. Like I said, my name's Melissa. I'm an MCAT tutor with MST, and please reach out if you are interested in any of our services or getting in touch, and best of luck on the MCAT. I believe in all of you. You got it. All right, and have a great night.